Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Battle Gamer, and today I want to talk about a new TTR. Well, it's not new, actually. I think it's actually been out for a few years, but it made a big splash in Gen Con this year, and it's a game that's new, at least to me, and that's going to be Fabula Ultima. Fabula Ultima, as you can see here, is a TTJ RPG, as it is fashioned off of the JRPG genre of gaming. It is got a lot of great artwork, and it's very much heavily influenced by, like the Final Fantasy 1 through 3 series, or just a lot of the old, like, 8-bit style of TTJRPG. Or, well, not TT, JRPGs. Sorry. As you can see by a lot of the art in the book, some of these characters might look somewhat familiar to you. Obviously, we got a white mage, a black mage, a knight of some kind, a barbarian. And I mean, it wears its influences on its sleeve. Fabula Ultima is a game that very much is a good hallmark for those who are interested in those kind of genres or one that kind of feel in a game. It's very novel, and well, in my personal opinion, I don't see Fabula Ultima being anyone's core game series. It is definitely a game that is worth dipping into every now and then to get that general feel. And something that I find even more interesting is because it's based on essentially video games, it also can open up the door for different types of roleplay based on, say, your characters being characters in a VR MMO, for instance. In fact, starting next week, we'll be doing a session 0, and then after that, we're going to be doing a one shot on the channel of Fabula Ultima, where the characters are all playing their video game, personas in a VR MMO. And if you're interested in seeing Fabula Ultima be played, I would definitely go check it out. As well, later today, we're actually going to be having a table talk where we talk about some of our experiences that we've had playing the game. So, if at all you're interested in what's going on with Fabula Ultima, I do highly recommend that you sub and join our Discord linked in the description so that you're more likely to see that content as it comes out. But I'm going to talk a little bit more now about what the game is actually about and what the book has to offer for you. All right, so as we're looking here at the table of contents, it shows a general, like, introduction, which just talks about like the 8 pillars, which a lot of people more refer to the 3 pillars of play, but the 8 pillars is a similar philosophy when it comes to TTRPGs. This also has a variety of the rules available, and if we go to the second page of the contents here, you can see that there is the world creation rules, class character creation, and a section on game mastery and a bestiary. Granted, the bestiary, in my opinion, is very lackluster. It gives you a good starting place, I guess, for the game, but the bestiary is not something I would heavily rely on to carry you into your games. It's a game that's going to force you to do a lot of custom creating for it. This is not the same kind of custom creation I would say that D&D 5e has. More, it is a style of custom creation where the game has a very basic setup, and monsters from some levels to higher levels don't really actually get that big of a difference in, like, their stats. Rather, they tend to get more HP, more MP, which are mana points, and they might get additional traits that make them more difficult to deal with. And that's kind of one of the strange sticking points in the game system. And let me give you an example. All right, so starting off with some of the beasts that you might start off at level 5, which the game actually starts the players off at level 5, and in actually a really, really fun and interesting system, but we'll get to that in a little bit. I just kind of want to show you how the stat progression works. So you can see here a couple level 5 creatures, the caterpillar and the giant rat. So the caterpillar here, you can see, uses a dex of a d8, an insight of a d6, a might of a d10, and a willpower of a d8. So generally speaking, your stats average around d8s as 60 HP, and the little star with a number to the right represents crisis. So players might not know how much damage they've dealt to a creature until it enters crisis or bloodied, if you're familiar with the system. If you play in that way, it's a good way to show damage without showing numbers, which a lot of people enjoy. Personally, I don't mind showing the damage or the HP bars of enemies, as it makes it easier for my players to kind of visualize the battle. But you can see it has a couple basic attacks, and then it has a special rule, which is a unique feature that allows the creature to do something different in its turn. Now, it also has a defense +2 and a magic defense of +1. These are added to essentially the dex and insight right above, which is why they're orientated in this way, which is really good design, I might add. And to the right of it, you can see the creature's general resistances and vulnerabilities highlighted by either RS or VU. They'll also have IM for immunity. And then if it's great, it just means neutral, and it doesn't take more or less damage from that type of damage. So that's the general breakdown, right? These are level 5 creatures, and here are the stats. The traits section is not super important for players, but it can give the GM a good idea of like how these creatures might interact in your game world. Now, if we scroll down a little bit further, we're going to see some level 10 creatures, but let's go further than that, and let's go to this section here that has the Sun Bear and the White Howler, a level 15 and a level 20 beast. Now, this game goes up to level 50. So you can kind of gauge between 5 and 50 how dangerous something is. A Sun Bear being level 15 would be at minimum at least 4 levels higher than a character would be in, say, a game like Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder 2nd Edition. So for the Sun Bear here, we can see their stats: D8, D8, D10, D6. Again, pretty much the same stat spread, only a little bit different than the cutter that we saw before. Also defense +1 and magic defense +2. And again, we're seeing a lot of the same numbers. The only big difference between the cutter and the Sun Bear is the Sun Bear has just a little bit more HP. And if we look at the White Howler, which is a little bit higher level than the Sun Bear, even, we got D8, D8, D10, and a D8. So the White Howler level 20 has about a D8, or has one die higher than average. And that's kind of where the game takes a lot of its pacing. Is the creatures grow at a really slow rate. This creature is technically halfway to max level, almost, off by 5 levels. And it only gets one die increase. And you can see here, defense +2, magic defense +1. Again, we're looking at almost no increase. The only big increases that creatures tend to have is how much damage they do with some of their abilities. This one has a spell called Iceberg that does high roll, which when it comes to damaging, you use the highest roll for your attack, essentially, to do damage, +30. That's an immense amount of damage, honestly, compared to even like the Sun Bear, who has a high roll +10 in damage, is really good. Though this one also does a status effect, making the Sun Bear more dangerous. Now, if we can compare this back to the Cutter and the Giant Caterpillar, there we go, and the Giant Rat that we saw before, they do 5, a high roll +5 and an effect, or just high roll. There might be another creature that does, high roll +10. So you can see here, generally speaking, this game is not about stat progression in the normal sense. It is a game that does minor stat bumps, but it's mostly about what you can do, and it scales mostly around HP and MP on what you're capable of doing. I mean, it's not a bad system, especially considering that essentially the more MP you have, the more higher ability, the higher damage abilities you can use in succession. and the more HP you have, the more punishment you can take. So the general balance is more about what your character can output versus and take versus how high the numbers are actually getting. And let's talk about how characters progress, as it's actually genuinely super interesting. All right, so when you're making a character, there's actually a lot of interesting parts to it. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to give your character an identity, which is a mix up of who they are, the general theme of the character, and where they come from. Now, these parts don't really play into your stats, excuse me, as much as they play into your character's narrative. And one of the big core concepts in this game is the use of Fabula points. Fabula points are like hero points, or a lot of other systems have a name for this kind of system. It's a point that you can use to kind of change rolls, to re-roll dice, or to add bonuses to certain checks. And you get Fabula points pretty frequently in this game, actually. And the whole point of that is so that you can use them to push your character's narrative using things like your identity, theme, or origin. Essentially, if anything plays to your identity, theme, or origin, you can get a chance at re-rolling one or both of the dice. I didn't mention how I guess how the dice works. So the dice in the system works with two dice using either the same stat or two different stats, depending. For instance, a barbarian using a massive club weapon to strike an enemy is probably going to use might and might again. So two might dice to indicate their level of success. And as I mentioned before, the creatures, the high roll of those two dice will be added to their damage. While a character who is kind of like negotiating with a merchant might use their insight and maybe even their like willpower to get a better view on the conversation and to push themselves through to get a better deal for them and their party. So that in line, when you use a Fabula point, you can choose to re-roll one of those dice or both of them. So when you make a roll, you can be like, oh, well, I got a really high roll on my insight, but my willpower was really bad. So if I re-roll that willpower, I have a really good chance of doing a lot better. And that's actually better than a straight re-roll, as you might get another set of low results. This, in turn, allows the players to do really well in certain circumstances as long as it ties into who that character is. Conversely, a player can opt to fail a check automatically as long as it plays into their origin. Say a pauper character, a character who is born and raised on the streets, could opt in to fail a persuasion against a noble because they just speak too crudely and they might not be able to get on the same level as the noble. This, in turn, will give that player a Fabula point back, allowing them to succeed somewhere else that their character is better suited for. Overall, I really do like this system, and it allows the player to really play up to that character's strengths and to play into their weaknesses for a benefit. I think any system that allows you to fail forward is a really good system. Now, on top of the general narrative bits, this game does have a surprising amount of crunch, and for what I consider a rules light game, this has a lot more crunch and is a lot more structured than you would find in other rules light systems. So, when you're starting out, you get 5 levels, and these 5 levels must be split between at minimum 2 classes. You can split up to 3 classes when you first make your character, and as you level up, you can invest in other classes as well. Though you can never be investing in any more than 3 classes at once until you master one of those classes, which means you get 10 levels in that class. So the optimal way to play is actually to level 5 classes all the way to 10. So by level 50, you have 5 master classes. Each time you master a class, giving you a heroic skill that vastly changes how you play the game. So you can see here that there is the ARCANIST. Now, the ARCANIST also shows, and also with the Avatar, Chosen, or Summoner. The biggest thing about Fabula Ultima is they do not give solid, strict names for how anything is done. Depending on the world that you're creating or the players you're playing with, you can indeed just make your character class name anything you want. In fact, your character is actually going to be a combination of classes always. No character is ever going to be solely an Arcanist. They're going to be some amalgamation of other classes that makes a unique character. And on top of this, every time you level, well, first of all, I should mention, so you can see here the Arcanist's free benefit. So just by having Arcanist as one of your classes, it gives you an increase to your mind points, which is your mana, essentially. Each class gives a bonus to something or other, which is really good and gives your base stats a pretty healthy boost. And then you see here their skills running down the page. Now, these skills can be taken once or a number of times equal to the value if there's this star indicator with a number next to it. So Arcane Circle, for instance, can be taken 4 times as you are leveling up the Arcanists. Now, you only get 10 levels, and as you can see here, just with Arcane Circle and Emergency Arcanum, that is a majority of, or that is all the levels, meaning that you wouldn't have arcane regeneration, you wouldn't have bind and summon, and you wouldn't have ritual arcanism down here. So you have to pick certain things from your classes that you're going to want for your build. This makes each character, even two characters who take Arcanist as one of their classes, they're going to be unique. Also, I recommend that if you're playing Arcanist, you need bind and summon. It is kind of one of the core features of the class, but beyond that, whatever you invest in is up to you. And this game has a pretty strong variety of characters and classes they can get. The Chimerist here is essentially a blue mage. One of their big things is that they can learn spells using their spell mimic from monsters, which is really cool. And a lot of these classes as well, one, all come with really good artwork, as you can see with the Darkblade here, but they all do very unique and different things. An Arcanist is not going to play the same as a Chimerist, and a Darkblade isn't going to play the same as, say, like the Defender class, which is down here. Oh, a little bit further. I wish these were alphabetical. Here we go. Even though the Darkblade and the Guardian have heavy armor in the like, one specializes in using dark emotions and dark magics, and the Guardian uses defenses. And how you play is actually changed by which ones you select. Now, this all amalgamates, as I said, into whatever your character is. And what I love about this game is you can create very unique character identities based on what combination of classes you select, how you use the skills from each of your classes, and even then, what your character is not going to be any one of its parts, but the whole thing together. You can make a demon hunter character that takes parts of rogue and darkblade to make it where you can, invoke a bond of vengeance against an enemy and strike them whenever they're suffering from any kind of debuffs. And that's only 2 of the optimally 5 classes that you can have maxed out. And I did mention before that there are heroic skills. So every time you get a class to 10, you get a heroic skill that adjusts even further how your character is played. And they're pretty intense if I'm going to be honest here. Now, there are a generic list of skills you can see here, but there's also a bunch of skills based on the kind of classes that you've maxed out. For instance, adversity here is a special bonus that you can only get if you have a dark blade that is level 10. Now, another interesting thing about this is a lot of the classes will have multiples. As you can see, Darkblade has 2 on here. You can actually get both of those. Every time you get a class to level 10, you get a heroic skill, and the heroic skill you pick has to be one that you qualify for. So if I leveled Darkblade to level 10 and I picked up Adversity, and then I leveled Fury to level 10, I could also then take out Heartbreaker rather than Fury's Monkey Grip, which Monkey Grip is actually really, really good, or any of the generic ones as well. So like I said, the optimal way is to get 5 classes up to level 10 so that you can get 5 heroic skills that change how you play. Now, let's talk about Monkey Grip, since this one is a very powerful skill in my opinion. Monkey Grip is good because it allows you to equip a two-handed weapon in a single hand slot. That means you can dual wield great swords, or you can use a shield and a great sword, which vastly changes how you play the game. That just increases the amount of damage essentially you can do with your melee weapons and makes you very strong. There's all kinds of ways that these particular heroic skills can blend to make your character truly unique in what you can do, and it's what makes the game feel particularly good to play. In addition to your character stats and your character skills, there's also your character's equipment. Now, you have a couple hand slots, you have an armor slot, and you have an accessory slot. All these together make up what your character is capable of. And as well, something I do like is you can see here under the basic weapons, there are even categories for magic using weapons. And the staff here you can see uses its willpower for its for its accuracy. Though it does do physical damage, so it could be just seen that you're bonking them with your staff. But in any regard, it doesn't matter. Even a full spellcaster can utilize weapons almost as well as the martial characters can. Granted, martial character weapons tend to do more damage. In any regard, it gives you some options you can use there. And as well, there is armor that you can see what the armor does here is your defense value is determined by whatever your armor indicates. Very typically, it's going to use your dex and insight. Dex for your physical defenses and insight for your magical defenses. Though, as you can see, some of the heavier armors down here, they don't use your dex at all. So even if you tank your character's dex die, you could still have a really good AC and typically a better AC than dex wielding characters. This is really good, but this does come with an interesting consequence in the game. As I'm showing here, we're looking at the rare brawling weapons in the game. Now, some of them do provide a bonus of +1, for instance, for the Nakode here, which is just a cat paw weapon, which is kind of fun. But their damage is relatively closer to the same. Granted, some of them do offer different types of damage, like dark damage or ice damage, which enemies are a lot more likely to be weak to some kind of elemental damage rather than physical. But you can see even the Hell Fist here does dex plus might to hit, no bonuses, and it does pretty much the same as a brawling weapon before, only it does additional dark damage. This weapon also has a unique feature that it targets magic defense, which is really cool. And all of these weapons do very interesting or cool things. They're all bumped in some way higher than your basic weapons, but this is the most that the game offers, as there's no weapon that you can see here that ever gets above a +1 to hit. Now you might be able to say, "Oh, well, that's because the game doesn't offer any items in the book that go above like level 10 or 20." And that might be true, but even at that point, the game is just not designed for high numbers. Your character getting a weapon increase might just not, like, getting a rare weapon at level 10, it might feel almost the same as getting a rare weapon at level 30. It feels kind of bad. Even on the page where it says designing rare weapons, it says right here you can add a +1 to the weapon's accuracy check. But if the weapon already has a +1, you cannot buy this again. And so I know they've released additional rules for this, and to be honest, I'm not the most versed in everything that Fabula Ultima has to offer. But as far as what the core book has to offer in our experience playing the game so far, it can feel a bit limiting. Now, granted, the weapons can do some very interesting things, and weapon swapping might be one of the core aspects of the game's design. I will say that beyond your character's HP, MP, and the number of skills you have available, statistically, there's not going to be very big differences between when you're level 5 and when you're level 30, which is a little sad for someone who's a progression junkie. Granted, there's a lot of ways you make your character stronger, and a character at higher level will, of course, be way, way stronger than a character at lower level. You can take more hits, you can probably deal more damage too, and you can increase your dice for your stats every so many levels, which is really good. It's just something that I feel like if you are a number cruncher, like I tend to be a little bit, this game might not be very satisfying as growth is not a very linear, like, it's a lot of vertical, or no, sorry, horizontal leveling rather than vertical progression, which might feel bad, but you can always adjust it. You can always add bonuses to the weapons, and I feel like there's a lot of ways that this can be done to make the game better. And as I've said before, this game does have a lot of need for the GM to kind of do their own thing, as the rules are lacking in some places, but more often than not, that's just the intent of the game design. In fact, when it comes to the world setting and everything related to it, well, there's no world setting. They give you a bunch of guidelines for making worlds, some random tables for making worlds. And I appreciate random tables, don't get me wrong. I love random tables. But it's a thing that, like, a lot of what you do in the game is in the end going to be purely fabricated by the GM, who's not going to get a lot of help when it comes to the setting, even monsters. As we saw earlier, all the beasts that I showed were pretty much all the beasts that are in the bestiary, and they only have a max one at level 20. So after level 20, you're just going to have to start making your own stats for the monsters. Now, they have rules for doing this, and I do have to admit, improving stats for monsters in this game is super easy. Way easier than D&D or Pathfinder 2nd edition, but you are going to have to make your own monsters, which is somewhat of a problem. On top of that as well, because the very horizontal leveling scale, you're just going to not feel like your characters are going to get amazing gear. Rather, they're just going to get new gear that they may like, may not like. And I mean, to be fair, that happens in games like D&D and Pathfinder as well. As you're playing them, you're just going to find magic items that probably just don't suit your build in particular. But I feel like that's just going to be a lot more of a thing here. So now we come to the end of the review, and I'm going to give my final thoughts. I genuinely really like Fabula Ultima. And I may have said, quite a number of negative things when it came to the book in general, but it was mostly just precautionary, right? I love the classes. Heck, I like how the game actually offers a lot of interesting ways that items change how you play rather than just help you do more damage. I feel like too many games very much the only focus is how much damage the weapon adds to your kit rather than what utility or other things it offers. And I think this game does very well at it. Not having a setting is not the worst thing either. It's just something that is going to, if you're getting into the game, you're going to want to know if you're going to have to do world building on your own. And while that might be part and parcel for a lot of GMs out there, there's a lot of new GMs who are just getting their feet on the ground, and they're going to need as much aid as they can get. And this game, while offering a lot of interesting aid tools for the help of creating worlds, is not offering as much as, say, D&D or Pathfinder, who already have a full world set up. And it's not simple like Vampire the Masquerade, where the setting is the real world, that you can just use real world places to kind of help orientate yourself and your players. Overall, I do think that the game is really fun. It's rules lights, but not so rules lights that's people like me who like crunch. It's rules light for a crunchy player is more or less the way I take it. The game rules are actually very simple. You roll 2 dice and you have a target number to hit. That target number is typically 10 or based on the enemy that you're facing. And your DCs are never going to get much higher than maybe a 12 or 13, depending on the situation. So there's not a lot of math that goes into the game. It's really just seeing the highest of, or well, you add 2 dice together and that's about it. So I do think that the game has a lot to offer, is pretty rules light, but unlike a lot of other rules light systems, I've personally struggled against because a lot of them are kind of just like narrative games that have rules as a guideline. This game has a lot more solid rules. The combat in this game is not super tedious, as it has a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense what's going on, and it doesn't really like become super granular. If a character is on the battlefield, they can reach that character without needing to use move actions, for instance, unless there's some kind of obstacle in the way. And characters who are using weapons versus range weapons are good for flying creatures, but other than that, melee and range characters are hitting generally the same without the need of spacing or distance or anything like that. The combat is also very fast. We did a 5 hour like one shot and we had like 5 combat encounters, which that's actually really impressive. And it wasn't even that it was an hour per combat encounter. We had a full one shot with some RP moments and us learning the game, and we still got through 5 combat encounters, which was pretty cool, honestly. The combat runs really quickly and there are some fair amounts of strategy, especially with how the skills go. So, if you want a bit more structure for like combat purposes, this game is really good and the rules light stuff works really well. And unlike a lot of other games, like a lot of the Powered by the Apocalypse systems, which is still a good system in my mind, but Powered by the Apocalypse can sometimes feel very homogenous with a lot of characters being able to do the same thing just in slightly different ways. This game offers a lot more differences. If you have a character who is playing a tank, that character feels like a tank. If you have a character who's playing a magic caster, that character feels like a magic caster. And there's no way the tanks can do the same thing that the magic casters can, and vice versa. I like that diversity because it validates player choice rather than having this homogenous stew of anyone can kind of do the thing, but they narratively do it differently, which just doesn't feel very validating for your character builds. And that's a personal preference of mine. If you don't mind that style of tabletop, then, that's completely fine. I'm speaking more to those who kind of crave a little bit more structure in their art tabletop light games. And I feel like Fabula Ultima is probably the best one I've played that is rules light, but has enough crunch to it that is satisfying to progress and also satisfying to run as a GM, as there's not many times I'm questioning like whether a thing works or doesn't work based on, my own understanding of how things work in a setting. But that's going to be it for me. Hopefully, this video was very informative to all of you. I know it's run a little bit longer than I would have liked, but I wanted to talk about each of the parts and give you guys the most information I could on Fabula Ultima so that you can make an informed decision if you decide to invest in it. As well, on the channel, as I mentioned before, we will be doing a live play one shot that y'all get to see. And we will be doing a session 0 where we'll be making characters. So you'll see how the characters are made. And we'll be on later today on Table Talk. And I'll be talking about our experience there. So you can ask any questions you might have. But that's going to be it for me. Thank you all so much for watching. Good luck with your games. Leave the bad luck to me and I'll see you all next time. Bye.